If you're watching this video, you already know that Adobe Premiere Pro is a giant among nonlinear editing software for content creators on YouTube and other short format venues. However, up until recently, it was barely a blip on the radar of editors working on bigger budget studio films and network television. But all of that is changing. One of the reasons for the shift is that over the last few years, Premiere has gained a strong foothold among independent filmmakers. In fact, over half the films at the 2019 Sundance Film Festival were edited in Premiere. Hi, I'm film editor Lawrence Jordan from Master the Workflow, and we provide information and create in-depth training for anyone who aspires to work in professional post-production worldwide. As Adobe continues to improve Premiere to meet the demands of longer format projects, a new generation of editors who learned how to edit in the software are carrying their knowledge over into their professional careers. Noah Diamond-Stolzman is one of this new generation of editors who, while skilled in a variety of NLEs, is widely recognized as an expert in the long-form Premiere workflow. He currently traverses the worlds of both assisting and editing, working on projects for companies like Discovery, Spike TV, and Viacom. He was a multi-season member of the editing team at College Humor, and last year he edited the independent feature film Donovan Reid. On his latest project, he's working as an assistant editor on the Netflix series Last Chance U, the final season. Today, Noah's going to share some of his knowledge about editing in Premiere, the unique challenges of working on tighter budgets, and finally, some insights about getting started in today's editing business. So let's get to talking to Noah. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. Working on some fun multicam minutia, getting that all cleaned and sorted out. And now I'm here to join all of you.
So Noah, tell us a little bit about your background. Are you from LA? If not, when did you come here?
No, I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area. It'll be my 5th year in LA this August.
Wow, so pretty recent transplant.
Yeah, relatively. I moved down 2015. Shortly after graduating, when I had a job I was doing up in San Francisco, my contract ended with that. And I figured, well, if I'm going to be looking for new work, I might as well look for in a new environment. I knew some people that had moved down here before me, and that kind of made the entire transition feel a little bit more accessible. My first weekend, I think a day or two after I moved down, was actually Edit Fest. I kind of took that as a sign.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, I went there straight after fresh in LA. I went to my first Edit Fest, and I met a lot of great people there that I still work and associate with today, including people who went on to found the Los Angeles chapter of Blue Collar Post Collective.
That's fantastic. And for people who don't know, Edit Fest is presented by the American Cinema Editors, and it's held at Disney Studios. And they have a bunch of panels. Usually each panel has about 5 or 6 editors, and they interview editors about topics, pertaining to the craft. It's really a great day of information, education, and networking. And usually they'll have a keynote speaker or a lead speaker. I think last year it was Joe Walker. Editor Joe Walker, and it's an amazing event. So if you get a chance, if you're in LA around that time of year, you should definitely try to go. And Blue Collar Post Collective is a wonderful organization that really supports new and upcoming post-production professionals. We at Master the Workflow work with them as closely as possible to provide scholarships to people who want to learn the profession. And you should check them out also. They're on Facebook and they have a website, Blue Collar Post Collective.
Primarily a Facebook group, but also exist in email newsletter format.
Yeah. So check those out if you want some information about what's happening. And they have chapters in Los Angeles, London, I think Adelaide, and
New York, which is where it was founded.
Yeah. So you came from San Francisco. Did you go to film school in San Francisco?
I did. I went to San Francisco State University. I did 2 years there. I transferred to San Francisco State out of community college, and wrapped up my film degree there.
Did you think film school was really critical to getting into the film business, or not getting in, but becoming a post-production professional?
I have very mixed feelings about it. I think on the one hand, I personally didn't take as much advantage of the networking as I could have. I wasn't involved with as many other people's projects, I think, which is the main strength is getting in with a lot of people. I think especially in production where there's a lot more of that style of networking. But I also was kind of in a weird place where I had a lot more of the fundamentals. I had done study film for 3 years in high school and for all my time at community college. I had done several professional internships by the time I was there. So I was kind of a bit ahead of the curve. I think there were some people in my classes who hadn't even really picked up a camera in a serious way before. They're like, film, that's what I want to do, and they went to school for it. So I wasn't there as much learning those kind of fundamentals, but I did really enjoy it. It let me kind of push my boundaries. I took a lot of interesting classes, and from like a critical thinking and theory perspective, I came out a lot stronger. That I think was my biggest takeaway from film school. I took genre studies, I took experimental documentary, took a lot of those kind of interesting things, classes and things that really expanded the scope of what I experienced. So that's that for me. I came out just more well-rounded as a consumer of film, and therefore.
Yeah, that's something that when people ask, is film school worth it? I didn't go to film school, and
oh, sorry.
Cat alerts. No worries. And, I just wanted to work in the business, and I had, and I just had all of this energy. And I had heard of all these people who never really went to film school, and they've become very successful. But you're right, the critical studies, just watching films and taking that time to sort of grow is really invaluable. Plus, the networking side. I mean, the people who, form relationships at school, a lot of times go on to, make films together for the rest of their lives.
And you got Thelma and Martin, although that's obviously a very different era, but, she met him in film school.
Yeah, and the stories of people coming out of USC Cinema who went on to work together are numerous. But did you know you wanted to be a film editor? When did you kind of get it?
Like I said, I started studying film my sophomore year of high school. I actually did it because I just really liked the teacher who taught that among other classes. So I wanted to take something with him. But once I started doing it, I realized that I had an interest in it in the past. Like I'd done a lot of silly films with friends. I had the Lego stop motion kit, which was which used Pinnacle, which I'm not sure what that NLE is, but I guess that was my first editing software. And pretty early on, like I started out wanting to be a director, and pretty early on, I kind of realized that's a bit of the default. Like I think anyone, when you first start exploring film, you just go to director, because that's just the entirety of filmmaking kind of gets distilled down to that. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I should kind of try and focus on what aspect I especially enjoyed. And it was the cutting that I really found that I enjoyed spending the time in that the most. And so I chose to focus on that fairly early on, I think.
What was your first job in film or video? How did you get it?
I had an internship in college for a local film studio or company, television company in the Bay Area. They do shows for like Investigation Discovery and History Channel and stuff. But the first thing I would consider like my real job in film was for a stand-up comedy startup in San Francisco called Rooftop Comedy, who were acquired by Audible while I was working there. We worked for Audible Amazon for a little while. And that was, I think the first time I was like, oh, I've got a job. And I actually took some time off from college because I was winding down there. I had like a few credits. I focused on that full time. And that was the job that when that wrapped up, I felt confident enough to move down to LA.
Wow. So what were you working with at that point, at that job?
That was actually very rudimentary in terms of editing. They basically, their big thing was they had cameras set up all throughout the country in comedy clubs, and they would record performances, and then we would screen them, and we would cut out content to then go back to the comedians and license for various platforms. So, it was almost more of an assistant editor job, despite my official title being editor, and it was a lot of working with their kind of proprietary tools for pulling the assets and stuff like that. Because we would get proxies basically beamed to our local machine while the full resolution files stayed local, and then we would pull time codes and put them into like a database software that would then kick off cutting out those specific clips and pushing them local to us and stuff like that.
I imagine, though, an experience like that was somewhat invaluable, especially being your first job.
Yeah, no, it was a really great place. And I met some people that I'm still very close with. And it kind of did set me on a bit of a comedy track. I worked at Viacom for a few years, doing a lot of stuff with Comedy Central, and then I ended up being at College Humor. And so, being, in that kind of space, it kind of helped. And we were working with a lot of comedians who were at like it worked at a specific level of comedian, people who were just about to get big, because the big people obviously were too big to do business with us, and the small people, we didn't want to do business or weren't at a level yet where we were valuable to us. So I did get to work with a lot of people who were on the cusp of blowing up, like, Roy Wood Jr. and Moses Storm, both of which I ended up working with again later down the road on a lot of stuff. So that was kind of cool, and it's been interesting watching people I was familiar with through that job kind of get more on the cusp and break out since then.
Cool. Alrighty, let's talk a little bit about nonlinear editing. So you cut in Premiere. Is Premiere your primary software package? Have you played or worked with others? Final Cut, Resolve, Avid?
Final Cut was probably my first professional NLE. I started in fact, iMovie and then graduated myself up to Final Cut 5 or 6, I think. And I was in there up until the bitter end. And after that, I actually briefly transitioned into Avid, because I figured if I was going to learn a new NLE, that would be the place to go. And I kind of got some Avid fundamentals, but I just wasn't at a level where there was Avid work coming in. And that's when I went and taught myself Premiere. And that's definitely been where I've spent most of my time ever since. Cool. I've played in Resolve, and I've done work in Avid as well, but it's majority Premiere.
Yeah, I've lectured at a bunch of colleges and universities around California, and I have not, USC obviously has an Avid setup, but I think UCLA does also, but pretty much all of the other colleges, UC Santa Barbara, LACC, Pierce College, all have Premiere installations. And so this next generation of editors is really, is learning on Premiere.
It's definitely more accessible. And I think another thing that makes it difficult to learn Avid at that level is that Avid thrives in an environment that those people aren't working in.
Right. Offline, online.
Or even just teams, large teams and stuff like that. Like, I was on a documentary show recently before this one that was in Avid, and being able to pull things from producers and push them to editors and update bins and stuff like that is all incredibly valuable and very powerful, and where Avid really shines. But when you're in college making films with teams of 5 people and one of them's an editor, it's just not something you need or are making use of, and so it's harder to really justify the investment to get an Avid workflow working for those shows or those projects.
But what about now? For example, your Netflix project, that's on a shared network storage, right?
Yeah, so it was on a shared network storage.
Right. Yeah.
Now it's all on Google Drive, which has been. I personally use Google Drive for shared storage for the feature film I cut, the documentary I'm working on right now as well. I've in fact kept just entire films on a sync Google Drive folder and let it just live update. And College Humor basically used briefly when I was there, used Google Drive as a shared storage for project files. We had an actual SAN for media and assets, but the project files were all sunk through Google Drive.
Wow.
It's definitely interesting. I'm not, this show is a company that's done a number of shows with Netflix, so they kind of have their workflow very kind of hammered out and very smooth at this point. So I've been mostly observing and kind of getting into how they are doing things. But they're just working with a lot of projects. There's a lot of story producers. So it's a lot of the story producers kind of working in their own folders with their own projects and pulling things together that then the editors will go and pull things from that. So I believe it's using a lot of importing and media browser and stuff like that. It's less of people working in the same spaces simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So that shared environment, is less crucial.
Are you utilizing the new productions feature yet?
We are not. We're still in 2018.
Oh, interesting.
Which has posed some issues because it's not an installable version of Premiere anymore, but we're making do. I think there's been some talk of upgrading, which I know is not kosher to do, but sometimes things push you. I mean, that documentary I'm working on, we've been at it for 4 years now. I can tell you we've upgraded the version of Premiere. We're working on that a number of times just out of necessity.
I think that you'll find the productions feature really worthwhile. I'm using it on a small independent film that I'm doing right now, and because I come from an Avid background, it enables me to sort of see the overall, get the 30,000 foot view the same way in terms of the folder structure and things like that, organizational structure. But I'm in the same boat. I'm working with an assistant who is in her own home, and she uploads stuff to Frame.io, which is really cool, by the way.
Frame.io is wonderful.
Yeah, it's an amazing tool, and I think that, once people kind of more people get an idea of how powerful it is, I think more people are going to start using it. But yeah, no, I really like Productions. I think, and it works in a shared environment, very similar to Avid in terms of bin locking and things like that. So I hope you get a chance to check that out.
I think, I mean, and while I love those features and stuff, I think that there's definitely a benefit to working in a more restricted environment. I think as a training tool, like it makes me think of when I was in film school, we had to do several projects on film. I shot a short, on a 16 millimeter Bolex. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I'm ever going to, need that skill on my resume. I'm never going to go for a job and they're like, hey, have you ever shot on a Bolex? Mm-hmm. But when you're shooting on film, when you're shooting with you've got a viewfinder, but barely, it teaches you a level of care and a level of rigorousness. You have to measure the focal length. You have to make sure everything's right. And that kind of, it teaches you to not be sloppy.
Right.
And I think similarly, when you're working, in Premiere in a shared environment where you don't have something like Productions, you have to be careful and you have to be clean and you have to communicate. And so I think it's a good way. It's instilled, at least in me, a kind of a more rigorous workflow because it's been necessary.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Whereas in Avid, you can, and I've seen, when I got into Avid, I even started getting a little sloppier because it's so much easier to just noodle around and do things just willy-nilly. I kind of had to rein myself back. I got, power mad, and be like, no, I still need to kind of bring that level of communication, that level of care from working in something that doesn't allow me to do this in order to make sure everything goes smoothly and clean.
Yeah, I mean, in small teams, I think it's pretty safe. When you get into bigger teams, it can get very hairy, non-shared, projects and things like that. Just keeping track of it gets nuts. But I mean, that's how it was in the original Avid days. There was no shared storage at the time. There was no shared projects, and everything was done over SneakerNet. And you had to be careful. You had to make sure you were not overriding a scene that someone else had just worked on. So yeah, they are good skills to have, and they are, it's better to be safe than sorry in that respect. So as a Premiere editor and in the types of projects you work with, including, your current one, do you usually get to work with other assistants, or are you the main assistant?
So it's been a mixed bag. So for Donovan Reid, the feature I did, I kind of had an assistant. Isabel Llanes, who's a good friend, came in and helped prepare the footage. And she got everything ready to edit. But because of the low budget, it was very much a side project for everyone. And the remote factor, I didn't have access to her really much after that point. She came back again to help a little bit with prepping for turnovers and stuff. But once the footage was in my hand, I was basically acting as my own assistant. When I was at College Humor, in the later seasons, I cut 5 seasons of a long form unscripted show there, and it became one of their flagship shows. And so after a few seasons, we pushed and had an assistant editor brought on. And that was really fantastic. And there was definitely a kind of a learning curve for me and just like what I was able to kind of pass on to them and, being so used to doing everything myself.
Sure.
So I had, we went through a few assistant editors on that show. And then like this documentary I'm cutting, it's just me and the other editor figuring things out as we go. And
tell me about the workflow in College Humor. I mean, did you get your dailies? Did you have to sync your dailies? Who how were they organized?
I never did that. College Humor had several assistant editors who would work for the whole company. And this kind of was, I think, born out of when they were in a more short form environment before they branched into long form content. And so those assistant editors would prep things and pass them on to the editors. And then very similar, the editors would be just on their own from there. And it was as this show kind of grew in scope that we got them to bring on a dedicated assistant editor who would just work on our show.
Was the show shot double system? Would the assistant sync dailies and organize?
Yeah, so the assistant would be doing syncs for our show because it was it's a Dungeons and Dragons show, so it's people sitting around a table, multicam. So they'd be prepping basically a time of day multicam sync map that we'd be cutting from. And then there's some pickup macro photography and stuff that they would inventory and log and prepare for us. And then I was lucky enough that the first assistant editor that we brought on was very skilled with After Effects, and so we started to push visual effects shots onto him because College Humor had a dedicated visual effects person, but he was incredibly busy, and so it usually wasn't in the time or budget to push requests onto him for our show.
So what were the biggest challenges working in Premiere on a show like College Humor? I mean, it sounds like pretty run and gun and a little chaotic. I mean, like a lot of unscripted shows.
It's just specifically from Premiere, I'm not sure I would say there was much. There was, that window, I think on 2018 where AAF exports were broken, and we couldn't turn over to sound.
Yeah.
From that, so we were using the very unlicensed Premiere downgrader tool to downgrade and push that into 2017 to output AAFs. Which, I mean, that workflow got a little wonky because, I mean, the show we were cutting is hour and a half to 2.5 hour long episodes in 4K, and the downgrader has a size limit of like 10 megabyte project file. So we would have to like make a special project file that was just the audio and everything really stripped down.
Wow.
In order for it to even work in that tool. Fortunately, there was in the past, there was a lot of issues with breaking out multi-camera audio, but that was mostly resolved by the time we started on that show. So flattening the audio for those turnovers and things, for the most part, had become a pretty painless process.
So in terms of turnovers to a sound house, for example, Premiere can output EDLs and AAFs and everything.
Yeah.
A company that would, for example, be working in Pro Tools.
Yeah.
Would need.
I tend to, as a default, prefer AAFs. I find that I've had the best success with them. But it's not uncommon that especially if time is a factor, I don't want to have to do another delivery. I'll output an OMF and an AAF. And deliver both of them just so they have access to both tools. And then, of course, XMLs are pretty standard for turnovers to color.
What about changes? Did you encounter a lot of changes, or were shows just locked when you were finished?
That was more often when I was at Viacom, because I worked in the digital short form department there for 2 years as an assistant editor and would handle the turnovers and things like that. That was more often where we would have last minute changes and tweaks. And a lot of times it would, we didn't have, Premiere doesn't have change logs or reels or anything like that. Or I guess it can have reels, but we weren't using them because of short form. And a lot of times it would be a factor of, they've added a sound effect. I have to, I'm going to take out an AAF of just that sound effect and send that to the mixer and be like, hey, insert this. Or even just send the sound effect on its own with just a time code note if it was something really simple.
Right.
And then, I was really we used Davinci Resolve for color. And while I haven't cut in Davinci Resolve yet, so I don't know how it is as an NLE, having those tools in just your color software is incredibly valuable because you don't need to go back to the NLE to make changes. Being able to hop over and make tweaks and stuff like that in the color grading tool after it's been colored was always incredibly valuable.
So are you saying for fixes, did you do? But you had a color house to do.
No. Our color was done in-house. We had a color suite and an in-house colorist.
Awesome, amazing.
So I would prep all of his projects for him, and then I would bring them back out of Resolve.
So even in that environment, you had a separate person for color and a separate person for sound, obviously, yeah. And you were cutting. And that's another thing that young people or new people coming into the industry kind of don't understand, because a lot of people are sold on the idea that, well, you can do everything because the software can do everything. But as it's practiced in long form, people specialize in a craft,
yeah.
Editing, color correction, sound design, sound editing. And but it sounds like you've, just from your background, you've got kind of chops in all of that stuff.
Yeah, and the interesting thing talking about that was I was at College Humor as they were gearing up and launching their long form streaming platform, and as they were transitioning from short form to long form and going through those very changes, on the short form content, when I came in, the editors did all the sound mixing, did all the color grading just straight in Premiere.
Right.
Even they had done some longer stuff. They had done some half-hour shows and stuff that hadn't launched yet, and they had done those with that same workflow. But it was as our show came in, with a hour and a half to 2.5 hour runtime, that myself and the other editor on that show said, no, we can't do the mix for this. You need to bring in, a sound mixer. And we started broaching that idea.
Yeah.
And it started there and kind of proliferated through a lot of those other long form shows until, the sketches and the sketches and extremely short form content was still being mixed in Premiere by the editors. I even still did that on other shows I worked on there, but that started going in, and then they built out a color suite, and we started, doing stuff in Resolve and doing more turnovers, and the workflow kind of grew in that, in about a span of a year from this very, more insular, one-man band setup to a more professional long-form workflow.
Right. Would you say that your skills in like Lumetri Color and Davinci Resolve are pretty adequate? I mean, would you?
Yeah, I mean, and we had a professional colorist, Jason Bodak, came in and did a workshop with all of the editors there and taught us a lot of fundamentals of color grading. I learned how the hell nodes work while I was there, cool. Which is weird to wrap your head around, but incredibly powerful once you get a grip on it.
Oh yeah.
So I had a lot of experience through Viacom with the workflow of turning over, and I learned a little bit of color stuff there because I would sometimes do fixes when the colorist wasn't in and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely broadened my knowledge of it there.
Yeah, it's great to be forced to do all that stuff because
and I think that's valuable just to increase, even just to be able to communicate with the colorist, knowing how the fundamentals of what they're doing and how they're going to accomplish things that you are talking about, makes
Absolutely.
that process so much smoother.
Yeah, no, I agree. Having come from, a Hollywood union background, I've been siloed, much of my career as just, at first, obviously an assistant editor for many years, and then as an editor. And I've always had this desire to learn Pro Tools, but, as far as I can see, it looks like, Szechuan Chinese to me. I just can't, which is crazy because I was one of the first guys to cut on the Avid and I'm incredibly adept at that. But, I like I say, I think it's great to dip your toes, especially early on, and know as much as you can. And I think that a lot of editors, again, sort of like younger generation editors, are doing so much stuff. Even guys like Alan Bell are doing his own visual effects work, and I know a lot of editors who do tremendous 5.1 sound mixes and in temps and things like that. And it's a lot of work, but you make yourself more marketable that way. I mean, let's just face it. So let's get into the whole getting into the business. What do you think is the most important qualification for an assistant editor to have?
I'm going to feel bad because I'm just gonna steal it straight from what Richard always says. But you got to be someone that people want to spend 10 hours trapped in a room with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to make it sound like it's just a popularity contest, but being someone that people enjoy being with and is so incredibly valuable. And so much of this industry is referrals, and people are going to refer to the people they get along with. Not to make it sound like favoritism or anything like that, but you're not going to refer that guy who pisses you off every time you're in the same room with them.
Definitely not.
Especially when you're referring them to someone else and you're putting yourself on the line.
Right.
And they become kind of stepping forward as an extension of yourself.
Right. I mean, I think that it's incredibly simple when we look at it, sort of objectively, is that you could be the best technically versed assistant in the world, and you can have an encyclopedic knowledge of film history, but if you're an asshole, no one's going to want to work with you.
Yeah. Or unless you're Stanley Kubrick or, Alfred Hitchcock.
That's true. But those guys weren't editors.
Yeah, well, yeah, and those are both filmmakers who I've long said, especially for Hitchcock, that they have their advice on filmmaking is terrible if you're not them.
This is true. True.
Famously, Bobby Osteen talks about in her book that in Rear Window, Hitchcock cut the movie in the camera and there was 90 feet of unused film after it was edited, which is like 2 minutes, I want to say, at 35 millimeter. Right. And it works for Alfred Hitchcock, but I don't think any other director should be taking that lesson to heart.
Right. No. Guys who cut in the camera, they really better know what they're doing, because otherwise you're screwed as an editor. So, but what about technically? I mean, a lot of people say, well, I want to be an editor, but I'm not that technical of a person. What do you say to that kind of person?
It comes down to being, willing to learn, being willing to take on what you can. I think you can't know everything. And I think trying to be like, I have to, know these things. I think knowing everything before you go into the job is an unrealistic expectation. You have to go into a job being willing and able to learn everything you need, and being open and being a sponge and really just soaking that all up in that way. I think every job is unless you're something you've been multiple seasons or something that you've done that specific workflow before. Every job's going to be a learning experience, and you need to be able to take those punches.
Yeah, I say that all the time, and it's one of the things that keep me going in the business is that I'm thrilled to do a certain kind of project like my last one, which was this massive visual effects film. In spite of it being a comedy, it was like getting another master's degree. I mean, I learned so much about visual effects, even just how visual effects work in the Avid, and I had done other visual effects films, but things have changed so much, and so on and so forth.
And I think even I take it back when something is the same show over and over again. I cut 5 seasons of Dimension 28 College Humor. Our workflow on season 6, because I cut through season 6, was a dramatically different workflow than it was on season 1. Because we were always kind of our goals were changing and how we were approaching things were changing and evolving.
Yeah, sure. So in general, what recommendations do you have for new people, trying to become editors or assistant editors?
Learn as much as you can, but don't. For me, at least for my style of learning, I wouldn't stress about memorizing everything. The way I learn is very much through kind of osmosis, and I just kind of absorb things, and then they kind of exist. When I encounter them in reality, they're familiar. I might not even know it. I took the assistant editor boot camp, and I learned how to do all the dailies and stuff in there, but I didn't memorize it or retain it. But when I got a job where I had to do that, I was like, oh, this is not foreign and alien to me.
Right. But learning by doing.
Yeah, and then I was able to, go and I look up Will Blank's tutorial, stuff like that, and piece it back together when it kind of became necessary and work into that space. And and then there's also just it makes it really tough for people who are trying to make it in the industry from other locations, but being where the people are.
Yeah.
I will keep going back to my first time at EditFest, which is a influential day in my career. The internet makes things so much more. It makes that more accessible. Like Blue Collar Post Collective, you can be a presence in the community without having to physically be there. Hell, the main reason I'm here is we ran into each other at an event, and you had commented that you had seen me all over the Adobe Premiere groups.
Right.
And so that wasn't even the connection itself was an in-person one. Right. But
virtual
forms online.
Yeah. There's so much opportunity to network and to meet other people and other filmmakers. So I would encourage people to take advantage of that, and don't be shy. Don't be a jerk, because that'll put people off. And sometimes behind the keyboard, we have tendency to maybe speak a little bit differently than we would as if we were talking to somebody face to face. So, but yeah, develop relationships and ask questions. I think that's the best.
And I think going to events like, and this is definitely something I've learned through the kind of philosophy of Blue Collar Post Collective of fostering connections. It's not about, you're not going to go to EditFest and you're going to hand someone a business card and they're going to call you and give you a job. But you're going to go to EditFest and you're going to meet someone, and then you're going to go to visual artists and you're going to see them again. And then you're going to go to this and you're going to go to that. And it's this kind of constant exposure and being active and present and becoming familiar in that way.
Yeah.
That creates those connections.
Yes, absolutely. And you're right. LA, New York, London, these are, kind of like ground zeros of, post-production and professional filmmaking, long form and longer form and television. But virtually you can start your networking and meet people and kind of become a member of the community from anywhere. And there are filmmaking hubs everywhere. Austin has a filmmaking hub, San Francisco. It's happening in a lot of places, and there are certainly a lot of opportunities just to get your feet wet and just to sort of get in the door, get a job as a grip or a focus puller or somebody who just helps out an editor somehow.
I've long said that I'm a little envious that production has so much more rungs on their ladders.
Yeah.
In terms of you can go in and you can be a PA, and you can be a PA in any department, but if you want to be like a cinematographer, you can go hang out with the camera department and breaks and stuff, and then maybe you're a camera PA, and then maybe they bring you in as like a third ace, and you can kind of like work. There's so many more steps and rungs you can do. Whereas in post production, it's a much
Yeah, post PA, assistant editor.
and even post PA, I feel like is tougher because they don't interact as much. Like it kind of tends to run more into the management, post coordinator, post supervisor ladder. I mean, it's definitely a good entry level point take where you can, but I feel like I probably know more people who never worked as a post PA that are working in post than have.
Right. So like for those first couple of jobs though, I mean, somebody's really green, maybe just got to town, whatever. Do you think the networking is sort of like the key element? I mean, do you cold call? Do you email? Do you send out resumes? Do you go to some of these job websites?
For me, Facebook has been an invaluable tool. Truth be told, and being on the right Facebook groups and being quick on the trigger. My first job in Los Angeles, I got 2 months after I was in for a startup company that posted on Facebook, and I was there for 9 months. And I left there when I went to Viacom, and that was all. These were both through Facebook job posting. College Humor was a Facebook job posting. This job I'm at now was a Facebook job posting. But and I think that and I hate giving that advice because it just feels so out of your control to be like, just sit there and wait for a good, because there's a lot of terrible jobs on Facebook. But yeah, you kind of, I have notifications turned on for all those groups because I firmly believe that being quick on the trigger is, Viacom, I was the first person to respond to that job. And the person, my person who became my boss replied to my comment on that post and no one else's.
Wow.
But then there's a certain amount of leveraging. Like, I saw the job posting at College Humor. I knew someone who was working there at the time, Brittany Joyner. I knew someone who had edited for them in the past, Andy Young. I immediately reached out to both of them and said, "Hey, can you put in a word for me?" And I was fortunate. And this is the only reason I still do this, because I kind of hate commenting on the post saying, "Hey, I messaged you or I emailed you." But I had that response, and like 10 different people who I all knew through Blue Collar Post Collective replied to my comment saying, "Hey, Noah's great and you should hire him."
Oh, that's awesome.
And that actually got brought up in my job interview.
Right.
They were like, "Oh yeah, this happened." When I applied for this job, I did a little Facebook stalking. I went and looked at the profile for the person who posted the job, and I looked at our mutual friends. And we had, I think, 4 mutual friends, wow. 2 of whom I was comfortable hitting up. And they're like, "Hey, can you reach out to this person? I just applied for a job that they posted. Can you put in a good word for me?" And when I went to the job interview, the interview was with a different person, not the person who had posted it, but he had my resume printed out and written in pencil at the top with 2 references.
Wow. Well, that brings up a really good point, which is start developing your reputation, because your reputation is really what is going to get you in the door and get you jobs. It's what other people think about you, whether you're easy to work with, whether you're proficient at what you do, whether you're a good person in general. And I don't know if people think about that, especially when you're very young. You have a reputation, and it's important to sort of start building that early and making it as good as possible. Would you be up for answering some questions?
Of course. Yeah. So we've got someone here asking, would love to know my workflow in Premiere for features.
Fantastic.
It comes down to, I guess if we're talking bigger scope workflow at a technical level, I think Premiere is very fluid. I think when it comes to organization and stuff within the edits and within stuff, is as long as you are organized, do what works for you. But I think it's important in general is to have, in post-production, have a strong roadmap of where you're coming from and where you're going. My personal workflow, while the attached proxies workflow is incredibly powerful and incredibly cool, and I do use it for some projects. I used it for Dimension 20. Their shows where it's very valuable. I am a big fan of just an old school offline workflow of, transcoding everything, bringing it into Premiere, working, Donovan Reid I cut with either 720 or 1080 proxies the whole time, and we just turned it over in Resolve. And Resolve is so amazing at doing conforms, and at taking, up-resing footage. That project was shot 5K on Red, mastered in 4K, and edited in 1080. And the changes between those 3 resolutions never pose a problem because of the way Resolve can do upscales. I was able to feed it a 1080 sequence, be like, "Hey, make this sequence 4K and relink to this 5K footage."
So you're basically saying, forget about the proxy workflow in Premiere. and match back sort of traditional.
If you're doing turnovers, yeah. If everything's living in Premiere, then things get a little more complicated. Premiere is not as strong as doing a reconform as Resolve is, understandably. In that case, yeah, maybe look at that. I cut a music video recently, and it was shot 4K, and I knew it wasn't going anywhere else, so I transferred that to proxies and attached them because it was a 4K. It was like I had 6 or 8 multicams. I needed to be able to throttle that down if it was going to work.
But on a show like College Humor, would you guys make your own proxies, or is there a lab involved?
No, that's all the assistant editors creating those proxies. I believe in Resolve, and we did use the attached proxies workflow. In fact, for Dimension 20 was kind of a unique beast because it was this multicam long form, and we were using it's only 3 or 4 cameras. Not a ton of content got cut out of it. And so we actually, and this is a very unusual case, and we did this for some of the kind of game show format shows we did, like actually. But we actually went in and graded all of the footage in Resolve beforehand.
Wow.
And then output full resolution colored footage.
Oh, wow.
And we also had proxies, that we attached for streamlining purposes, but when it would come to master, we would just master straight out of Premiere with that pre-graded footage because of the nature of these multicam shows. It was just smoother and easier to knock that out beforehand.
And it saves a ton of money.
Yeah. And so, that's obviously a very unusual beast. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of that. One thing I'm really loving, and this is for, I assisted Andy Young on a comedy feature he's doing. We haven't done turnovers yet, so I haven't seen the other end of this workflow yet. But that is creating dailies in Resolve with the multi-channel audio baked into it.
Right.
And doing the sync in Resolve. And Resolve is a very interesting approach to syncing. And then just giving single clips. You don't have to work with multi-clips or merge clips you shouldn't be working with. And basically being like, okay, you cut the whole thing. You've got the multi-channel audio and it's full quality, so you can just turn that over to sound directly off the proxies, and then online the footage back in Resolve. And prepping it was an absolute delight and breeze. And I expect the turnover to be just as smooth. We'll see.
Right. But are you cutting with all those tracks?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm not cutting it, like I said, but
oh, I got you.
But yeah, he was cutting with all the tracks. There was some hiccups. He's a big fan of he likes to have all his clips renamed, so it's like shot and take names just on the timeline, which that's very easy to do when you're doing a multi-camera source sequence. You just rename the source sequence and leave the original assets with the same name, but you can't do that when you're working with what is functionally what you want a merge clip to do.
From what I understand, in Resolve and in Premiere, you can like right-click on multi-channel clips and basically treat them like multi-cameras. So if you're looking for the boom or the lavaliers or one character or another.
Are you talking about going in and modifying the audio channels?
Yeah, but just like by right-clicking it in the timeline.
You can like disable, enable specific channels. Or specific, as individual tracks. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. You're working with one track, but all the other tracks are hidden, and you can just switch them like a multicam picture.
Yeah. I think you have to be in a multicam to do that. You wouldn't be able to do that with this workflow. One thing that's actually really interesting on this Netflix show, and this isn't something I've worked with before, but it's really interesting because there's so many microphones, because it's an unscripted follow style show, is they actually take all of the multi-channel audio, run it through Wave Agent, and split them into individual files.
Right.
And then they go and take the individual files and append the name of who's on that microphone to that file.
Right.
And then bring them in and then stack them in the timeline and link them all. So it's the stack message is all linked, and that for story producers and editors, I can imagine must be incredibly valuable to look at the names of the tracks of the assets and see who they specifically are. So that's been really interesting. And just to answer the follow up, I have worked. I primarily keep everything in one project. I think that's not as much of a problem as it used to be for Premiere. And I actually have a theory about this because there's long been a correlation between loaded project file sizes and stability in Premiere projects. And I don't actually think that loaded file size causes unstable Premiere projects. I think the things that cause unstable Premiere projects also cause bloated file sizes, if that makes sense. I think it's a symptom, not a cause. Because on Dimension 20, we had files that went to several hundred megabytes. And they got large, and we would have no problem. But when you get things like tons of warp stabilizers, those are the types of things, and those all that data gets stored. All of those things will increase project file size,
right,
and also increase project instability.
So it's specific elements.
Yeah, I think it's a symptom, not a cause.
But just to add to that, that goes away in productions, because essentially you can break your film or television show or whatever you're working on down into individual scenes. Each scene is a project in itself, and overall there's a master project, but everything's
and you're able to copy elements from one to another without it creating duplicates in other projects within the production, right?
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's pretty awesome. I think that's going to alleviate that problem if people are having it. When you build the whole show, who knows, or reels, who knows how it affects. I haven't gotten to that stage on this project yet, but so far it's working pretty flawlessly.
I don't have experience. One thing I love about syncing the dailies in Resolve is that when it comes time to turn over, in theory, when it comes time to turn them over, everything's already built out. Everything's already organized. All those assets already exist in Resolve, which is just kind of a nice, I don't want to say shortcut, but it's, you don't have to do that same work twice.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, and again, I'm a little spoiled because that's sort of the workflow that, our stuff is stored on servers when we get it from the lab, and it's all at Photocam, and we send them lists, and they take care of that part of the process. But again, what we were saying before, to have a working knowledge of this stuff, it's critical, because then you can communicate with these people. A lot of that stuff is falling to post-production supervisors, though, I find.
Interesting.
I find that, sometimes when the editor or even an assistant isn't as versed in the technical side, the post-production supervisor, a good post supervisor, will navigate that, for...
I mean, they do liaise between post-production and vendors and stuff. That doesn't seem too out of... But I mean, I think on the other hand, that the role of the assistant editor is getting more and more technical every day, and more things are going under the assistant editor umbrella. Maybe this is also for me spending so much time in the digital workspace where there aren't as much vendors. Even the high budget digital stuff I've been in, it's all being done in house with in-house mixers and colorists and stuff. But the assistant editor is needing to know so much more of this.
I completely agree, and I think it's going to scale like big time over the next 5 to 10 years, because I think we're moving to much more of a cloud-based sort of workflow, and there's going to be a lot more, I think, sort of, network involved information, and some of the reading that I've been doing has sort of mentioned that. So
I think it is a little bit of a problem in the industry right now. I don't know if it was like that when you came, when you were coming up, but there was so much more of a mentorship relationship between assistant editor and editor. An apprentice editor was a job that does, for the most part, doesn't even exist anymore.
No, I mean, that's one of the reasons why, Richard and I wanted to do this, because we are so siloed. People, don't get to interface with the editor. I
think people forget that the assistant editor is an editor. Like their title is, they are an assistant editor. I think, it becomes more assistant to the editor.
But I mean, working in a room with an editor as he or she was cutting, well, that's the way I was trained, and that's what I wanted to do. I mean, even when I was a first assistant, I was always trying to, teach the person I was working with more chores so I could spend time in the room watching that person, practice the craft. So
I want to answer this other question about how to figure out what effects carry over in EDLs and XMLs and which ones don't. I mean, trial and error never hurts. For the most part, it's the broad answer is if it's unique to Premiere, it's not going to carry over. And so for the most part, I tend to assume that anything that's not like a property effect, scale, position, rotation.
Wouldn't it be like a CMX 3600 kind of basic, sort of standard edit?
Yeah, anything where you're just straight affecting the attributes, those will carry over. Anything else tends to not. And depending on if you're doing a round trip or not, will need to be rebuilt in Resolve. One thing that is very nice, depending on your workflow, is Resolve can output an XML to go back to Premiere, where you're not outputting like a color time match, you're not outputting like the entire thing as one clip. You're outputting individual clips with handles, and it comes with an XML, and you can bring that XML back to Premiere. It rebuilds the edit, which gives you some fluidity to continue to adjust your edit depending on your handles, which is either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your producers. But in that case, it will reapply effects that were in Premiere. They won't be in Resolve, but they will become, it remembers them through that XML, which is also a good thing and a bad thing, because if you've got like a temp color or something on there, it'll apply that now on top of your colored footage or any effects that you have rebuilt. What I suggest, though, the workflow that I learned at Viacom, whenever I send anything to online to color, is I organize my assets by tracks. So like I have everything just regular on track 1, anything with a motion effect on track 2, anything with a speed effect on track 3, anything with any other just Premiere effects on track 4. And then when I bring it over to Resolve, I know like, oh, let me look at everything on track 2 and make sure those have all been rescaled. Let me make sure those are right. Let me look at everything on track 4 that's got an effect. When I round trip that back, I'm going to need to make sure each of those effects got reapplied or didn't. V3, that speed effects are really wonky carrying over. So those I'm going to want to specifically. And so that means at a glance I can know what's on each, what each clip is supposed to kind of contain. That helps with that troubleshooting, kind of knowing what came over and what didn't.
What about dynamic link with After Effects? Do you use that much? I mean, is that something?
I try and avoid it because it depends. It depends, I suppose. I'm a big fan of, whenever I can have a VFX just be like an alpha asset. That makes my life a lot easier. Mm-hmm. It's not always possible, but like if you're doing a screen replacement and you can just get that kind of you're not doing anything too complicated and just be like, okay, here's a ProRes 4x4 file that's just the screen and it's got the thumb cut out, and you can just drop it on top of the clip and there you're good, and then you can color the clip underneath it and do something like that. That's always the the ideal way for me. Mm-hmm. For things as opposed to sending them over. But dynamic links are nice. I know a lot of people like to render and replace them on the timeline so that it treats it like a clip, and then you can either have it duped and disabled, or you can unrender and replace to get the dynamic link back, which kind of helps with stability a little bit. Talking about turnovers, you got to be really careful to get rid of them when you're cleaning up for turnovers, because those won't carry over. Right. And then you have to figure out once again what your workflow is there. Are you grading the clip on its own without the VFX and bringing that color graded clip into After Effects?
Right.
And then, that can often be a very straightforward way. Or are you outputting the entire effect as, VFX shot and grading it with the effects on it? That's all kind of conversations that need to be had about the specific needs.
Right, because you always go back to your OCR, for finishing, correct?
No, I've mastered a lot of stuff straight out of Resolve. It depends, and that's once again another conversation to have is, do we need anything that's specific to Premiere? Do we have some effects that are Premiere specific? We got to send this thing back to Premiere to get them back in, and we can't bake them in as effect shots. A lot of the stuff at Viacom, we would do a lot of reversioning. We would do a lot of reformatting for vertical versus horizontal and stuff like that. So having all those final assets with handles and stuff for any reformats or reversioning, it was very valuable. One thing I like to say, that there's no standard workflows, and one of the things I learned at Viacom, we because Viacom, we dealt with such a variety of content in terms of formats, platforms, style, and stuff like that. And so every project was kind of sitting down and being like, hey, running through basically a mental flow chart of like, okay, where are we and where are we going? And learning all the variations and all the options at each step and figuring out which one is applicable.
Being flexible, sure.
My setup, I'm on a PC. I've got a solid state boot drive and a 3-drive RAID 5 spinning disk array. I cut some projects with external drives. The the show I'm on. I have an external drive provided by the show with our 14 terabytes of proxy footage. I'm currently planning, my next upgrade will probably be getting another solid state drive to replace the boot drive and then make my old boot drive into a media cache, just a standalone media cache, because I think that's something that will really help.
Now, is this
my
home
machine? No, this is my home machine. At work, it's 90% of the time I'm not connected to a SAN.
Anonymous attendee, I'm just starting a career in post-production and a little later in life. I have some editing experience, but would love to work in a post-production house and eventually be an editor or post-supervisor. I know you mentioned networking. Are there other things I should be doing? Are post houses more interested in recent college grads for entry-level jobs?
That's something that's not the path that I took, so it's hard to give specific advice.
I don't think so, man. I think that if you're good, and timing is such a big part of it. If you're at the right place at the right time and you've gotten your resume into the right hands, you're going to get the job. It doesn't really matter whether you're a college grad or someone who's worked in another area for a few years. I think the opportunity is there. So again, I think that keeping your references good, your reputation good, because you're going to bring that to whoever you apply for a job with. Being a decent person to work with, via con Dios, man, just keep plugging away.
And if you feel your resume sparse, find some interesting things about yourself that aren't work to put on there. We Blue Collar Post Collective, we did a resume workshop, and someone had on her resume that she had her helicopter pilot's license, and everyone who saw that did a double take. I'm like, that's going to get have you standing out in a stack of resumes, and also it's going to be a long shot if it ever comes up. But that day that resume comes across the table of someone who also flies helicopters, you're cold. You're going to go into that job interview and you're not going to even talk about the job. You're going to talk about helicopters for the entire time. I think Chris Visser talks about when he met Zach Arnold. They talk. I think it was bicycling. That was their connection. So make yourself a person on the resume.
Yeah.
If you don't, even if you do have enough to sell yourself as a professional, to be honest, try and find something like that, and that'll kind of help.
Yeah, that's a good.
Because for entry level jobs, for if you're applying for a job as a post PA, no one applying for that job is going to have a super strong resume for the most part, because post PAs who get strong resumes become post coordinators. So that's how you stand out from those other people who hopefully have equally not as strong resumes.
Alrighty, man. Well, it's hitting about the 9 o'clock hour out here on the West Coast, and it's about midnight in New York and the East Coast, so we should wrap it up. I want to say thank you to our guest, Noah Diamond-Stolzman. Noah, thank you very much for being here and answering our questions.
My pleasure.
And get a hold of Noah online. You're still on the board at BCPC, or you?
I'm on the Los Angeles committee. And I am the director of volunteerism for the organization. I'm Noah at bluecollarpostcollective.com. If I need to be contacted about anything regarding that.
Cool.
We're always looking for people to volunteer-driven organization. So from the bottom to the top. So you can make of it it is what you make of it, rather.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great group. You should definitely check it out on Facebook. We appreciate you all being here. Check us out at Master the Workflow. We've just uploaded last week's live stream with Richard doing a VFX webinar. So please check that out on our YouTube channel. And we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Noah.
My pleasure.
Take care.
Thanks for having me.